The winter in northern Minnesota had arrived with a vengeance. The kind that seeped into bones, crept under door frames, and turned the air into shards of ice. Snow had piled high across the flat expanse surrounding Thomas Hale's old farmhouse, and the wind whipped across the fields with a ferocity that made the skeletal trees groan like tortured souls. Thomas, 42, with hair prematurely flecked with gray and a face weathered by decades of northern winters, surveyed his small domain from the porch. His breath came in frosty puffs, mingling with the steam rising from a chipped enamel mug of coffee. He had spent the better part of 3 winters wrestling with this house. Built in the early 1900s, it had charm, but charm didn't keep out the cold. Drafts crept in through the sagging walls, the uneven window panes, and even the chimney flue. No amount of stuffing, sealing, or layering had stopped the relentless seep of cold. He had tried curtains, extra insulation, even a small wood stove in the corner of the living room. And still, the chill found him, no matter how many layers of flannel or wool he wore. Neighbors often passed by, their pickups kicking up snow, their laughter mingling with the roar of the wind. "Tom, you still trying to survive the ice age in that shack?" called Jerry Wilcox from his truck, his voice muffled under a scarf. Tom ignored the jab, though a faint crease appeared on his forehead. He had learned long ago not to waste energy defending his choices to people who saw life in simple, predictable terms. But the idea that had been germinating in his mind for weeks now, the one that might finally save him from another year of teeth-chattering nights, felt bold, maybe even reckless. He had studied heat flow and drafts like a man obsessed. Most people simply fought the cold head-on, adding insulation, sealing cracks, burning more wood. Tom realized the problem wasn't just keeping warmth in. It was keeping warmth where it mattered, preventing it from escaping upward through the ceiling and out the roof. The house's attic had always been an untapped reservoir of wasted heat, air rising naturally, carrying precious warmth with it, only to vanish into the frigid night. That was when he had the idea. It seemed insane, almost comical even to him. A door, yes, a proper door, but not in a wall, a door in the roof itself. The neighbors would mock, he knew. They already muttered behind hands about his eccentric experiments with old radiators and weather stripping. But Tom wasn't interested in impressing anyone. He was interested in warmth and maybe, for once, winning the war against the winter that had humiliated him year after year. He climbed into the attic, his boots crunching against the wooden boards, dust motes swirling in the weak light from a single hanging bulb. He measured, planned, and calculated, pencil scraping over the yellowed pages of a notebook. The opening had to be precise, angled just right to capture the heat trapped below while still allowing the roof slope to shed snow. He traced the outline with chalk, then tested the frame against the rafters. When the first vertical plank was secured, he could hear the faint groan of the old timber protesting his intrusion. He ignored it, hammering with deliberate, rhythmic blows. Each nail sunk with a satisfying thud, each strike a step closer to what he imagined. A sealed chamber above, trapping the warmth below instead of letting it leak into the frigid void of the attic. From below, muffled voices drifted up through the floorboards. Jerry and a few others had stopped by, coffee in hand, noses pink from the cold. "You're still in there, Tom," Jerry called. "What is it this time, a trapdoor to Narnia?" Tom wiped sweat from his brow, though the air in the attic was barely above freezing. "Something like that," he muttered, leaning to adjust the frame. "Just trust me, or don't. Either way, it'll work." "Ha, yeah, right," Jerry shouted back, laughter mingling with the wind. "You're crazy, man. Nobody's putting a door in the roof. What are you gonna do, crawl up there every time you want to go outside?" Tom didn't answer. He had learned long ago that the world didn't reward explanations, only results. He kept working, the hammer rising and falling like a metronome, driving nails, fitting hinges, testing the latch. Slowly, impossibly, the door took shape. A sturdy oak frame, reinforced with iron brackets, sitting flush with the sloping roof, almost invisible except for the carefully cut edges. By mid-afternoon, he had finished the installation. He climbed out onto the roof to inspect his handiwork, boots crunching in the snow, feeling the icy wind push against him. From below, he could see the neighbors craning their necks, their expressions a mix of disbelief and barely contained amusement. "Looks like a coffin," shouted one of the younger men, pointing. Or an escape hatch for alien invasions, another added, snickering. Tom smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Let them laugh. He didn't need their approval, he needed warmth. And this small, absurdly placed door was going to give it to him. The first test came that night. The stove burned low, casting a warm, amber glow across the living room. Tom pulled the latch from inside, sealing the door above. He checked the seams pressed against the frame and immediately felt the difference. The upward drafts that had always sucked warmth from the rooms below were trapped, forced to circulate horizontally. The air seemed to hang, still and warm, for the first time in years. From outside, he could hear the faint sound of wind thrashing against the roof. The old shingles rattled and shifted, but the door held. He stayed there for hours, moving from room to room, feeling the heat linger, a stubborn, living thing refusing to escape. Morning brought the first real proof. The neighbors had gathered across the yard, still laughing, still muttering. But as Tom stepped out onto the porch, breath misting in the cold morning air, he invited them to feel the temperature inside his home. They shuffled inside reluctantly, their skepticism palpable. Jerry Wilcox was first, rubbing his hands together as he stepped across the threshold. He froze, eyebrows raising in surprise. It's warm," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I mean, it's actually warm in here." Tom just nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. "Not magic," he said, "just observation and thinking a little differently." Murmurs spread through the small group. The laughter faded into quiet astonishment as they moved from room to room, feeling the difference. The warmth was even steady, no longer pulled upward and lost to the attic. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible until you had spent years shivering in its absence. And yet, beneath the surprise, a subtle respect began to form. They could mock him all they wanted, but this small act of defiance against the winter, had worked. From that day forward, Thomas Hale became something of a legend in the small town. People still laughed when they looked at the strange door in the roof, still whispered jokes about what it might be for. But when the wind howled and the snow piled high, they didn't notice the mockery anymore. They noticed the warmth, and they noticed that Thomas Hale had beaten the winter at its own game. And somewhere deep in the night, as the furnace hummed and the wind screamed outside, Tom Hale sat in the living room, arms crossed, eyes closed, finally tasting the victory of heat trapped, cold denied, and the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly, even if the world had doubted him every step of the way. The wind would come again. Winter would try to steal warmth, to mock and challenge him. But the door in the roof stood firm, a silent testament to stubbornness, ingenuity, and the courage to think differently when everyone else laughed. Following days brought the real test. Winter didn't just knock politely, it raged, a white-hot beast that clawed at every surface, every weak seam of wood and glass. Tom Hale woke before dawn, the horizon already glowing faintly through the drifting snow. The wind had picked up overnight, moaning through the skeletal trees like an old, vengeful spirit. He tugged on his parka and boots, stepped onto the porch, and felt the bite of the cold against his face. But inside his house, it was warm, steady, defiant. The door in the roof had done its job, keeping the precious heat from fleeing upward. He poured a cup of coffee and took a slow sip, savoring the contrast between the warmth inside and the frozen world outside. Then he heard it, a low rumble from the fields beyond. Snow drifts shifting, ice grinding against fences, the wind building into something furious. Today, the storm would come harder. Today, the neighbors would see if his crazy idea could survive reality. Jerry Wilcox was the first to appear, hood drawn tight, eyes squinting against the gale. "Tom, it's bad out there. You sure your house can?" His words were swallowed by a gust that sent snow spiraling across the yard. Tom nodded, voice calm but firm. "It can, watch." He opened the front door, letting the wind gust briefly into the living room before slamming it shut. The warmth stayed, unbroken, a tangible wall against the cold that tried to push past. Jerry's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to cautious hope. Other neighbors arrived slowly, drawn by instinct and curiosity. Some lingered at the edge of their driveways, skeptical, while a few braved closer to see for themselves. Martha Keene and her grandchildren, faces flushed with cold, arrived last. The children clung to her skirts, eyes wide, ears red, but their small voices whispered with excitement. Tom walked among them briefly, pointing to the roof. "It's the door," he said simply. "The attic used to be a trap, warm air woe. Old rise and vanish. Now it stays inside where it belongs. You'll feel it in a minute." The first gusts arrived like sharp knives, slicing across the snow-covered landscape. The neighbors watched as Tom opened the roof hatch from the inside, securing the latch. He pressed his hand to the frame. It flexed slightly, groaning under pressure, but it held firm. "Looks like a roof door," Jerry said, his voice still doubtful. "But does it really make that much difference?" Tom gestured for him to step inside. The neighbor's face registered the momentary hesitation before he entered, and froze. The warmth hit him like a wave, even with the wind hammering the walls from outside. He took an involuntary step forward, hands rubbing together, eyes darting around. I don't know how," he started. It's actually warm." Tom smiled faintly. Observation, thinking differently, that's all it took. The children laughed, a soft, fragile sound, running to the windows and pressing their small faces against the glass. "It's like magic," one whispered. "It's physics," Tom corrected gently, but allowed a hint of pride in his smile. The storm's fury grew. Snow and wind battered the farmhouse, rattling shingles and sending ice shards skittering across the porch. Tom moved swiftly, checking the door, reinforcing the latch, making sure the frame was holding under the punishing assault. Each gust pressed against it, testing it like a living thing, probing for weakness. And each time the door held, stubborn, immovable, a shield against the winter's wrath. Neighbors began to take notes, moving from amazement to curiosity to cautious admiration. Jerry even fetched a ladder to inspect the roof from the outside. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered, shaking his head. "A door in the roof, and it actually works." Martha Keene approached cautiously, children clinging to her skirts. "Tom, you've really done it. I can't believe it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, part relief, part awe. "The house, it's warm. The kids aren't freezing anymore." Tom shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "It's just patience and understanding. You fight the wind the wrong way, it wins. You guide it, redirect it, it obeys." Hours passed, the storm showing no sign of mercy. Tom moved methodically through his home, adjusting the stove, checking windows, making sure no other drafts undermined the fortress of warmth he had created. Each crack sealed, each latch tested, was a victory against the cold that had dominated his life for decades. From outside, the neighbors continued to watch, murmuring among themselves. Some carried tools, perhaps considering how they could replicate what Tom had done. Some simply stood, silent, eyes fixed on the farmhouse that now seemed to defy the very winter itself. As twilight fell, the storm reached a crescendo. The wind screamed like a living entity, bending trees, sweeping across the fields in sharp, chaotic waves. Tom pressed his hands to the roof hatch, feeling the subtle vibration through the wood as gusts battered it. It flexed, groaned, but did not give. He exhaled slowly, chest heaving, a mixture of relief and exhilaration coursing through him. Jerry, standing at the edge of the yard, raised his voice over the roar. I gotta admit, that thing's holding. That roof door, it's actually holding." A few more neighbors dared to step closer, nodding, murmuring in astonishment. "Never thought I'd see the day," one whispered. "The Hale house holding its heat against this." Tom allowed himself a quiet grin. He knew the winter wasn't defeated, not yet. But for the first time, he felt a measure of control. A small victory against a force that had seemed insurmountable for years. The night deepened, and though the storm raged on inside the Hale house, warmth lingered. The door in the roof had transformed a simple attic into a barrier, a sentinel holding heat in place, refusing to let the cold dominate. Families huddled in coats and blankets, but the room was noticeably warmer, their movements freer, their chatter less hurried and more relaxed. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Tom knew the neighbors would talk, mock, and maybe even try it themselves. But tonight wasn't about their approval. It was about survival, ingenuity, and the quiet, stubborn triumph of thinking differently when everyone else doubted you. By midnight, the storm began to ease slightly, a reluctant concession to the persistence of the house and the cleverness of its inhabitant. The snow still whipped across the fields, but inside the warmth remained steady, defiant. Tom stood by the window, looking out at the storm-lashed world, feeling the satisfaction that comes from winning a battle not with force, but with insight. The door in the roof had proven itself, at least for now. And Tom Hale, exhausted but exhilarated, finally allowed himself to imagine the long, cold months ahead without the gnawing despair of freezing nights. The neighbors could mock, the wind could howl, but he had found a way to hold the heat, and that, he thought with a quiet smile, was enough. The storm would come again. Winter would test him, challenge him, maybe even humiliate him. But for tonight, the house was warm. The children slept without shivering. And the door in the roof, ridiculous as it seemed to outsiders, had done exactly what it was meant to do: hold back the cold and give its occupants a measure of peace in a world ruled by frost. The next morning, the storm's remnants hung in the air like a gray, uneasy shadow. The snow lay in uneven drifts, sculpted by the wind into jagged peaks and valleys that made walking treacherous. Tom Hale stepped onto the porch, boots crunching into the hard-packed ice, eyes scanning the horizon. There were no sun rays piercing the clouds, only a muted, cold light that painted everything in shades of silver and blue. But inside his house, the warmth was undisturbed. The roof door had held through the night, and every gust that would have stolen heat now broke against the clever barrier he had built. Across the yard, neighbors were already stirring, bundled against the chill, carrying thermoses and tools. Jerry Wilcox approached first, shivering but eager, eyes darting to the roof. "Tom, I didn't sleep much," he admitted. "Kept thinking, what if the door fails? What if it lets all the heat out?" Tom shook his head, adjusting the latch one last time. "It's holding. I checked every brace last night. The heat stayed put. The storm's worst is over." Still, the moment was tense. They had all felt the gnawing anxiety that came with winter storms in Nebraska, a creeping knowledge that cold could invade even the strongest walls if underestimated. And today, another test awaited. The fiercest gusts often came mid-morning, when the sun warmed the upper air just enough to create violent currents. By 9, the wind had picked up again, a roaring, erratic force that tugged at trees and tore at the loose snow. Tom's hands moved deftly over the roof hatch, ensuring every bolt, every hinge was secure. The first blast hit like a hammer, rattling shingles and pressing against the hatch with such force that the walls groaned in sympathetic strain. The neighbors watched, holding their breath, seeing the tiny flecks of wood and iron under pressure, expecting a failure at any moment. And then it happened, the first real crisis. A sudden gust slammed into the roof at an odd angle, forcing the hatch upward just slightly, the latch straining under the assault. Tom's heart raced, fists clenched around the handle. If that door failed now, the heat would escape instantly, and everything inside the house would plummet in temperature within minutes. "Hold it," he shouted, voice nearly lost in the wind. His gloves slid on the icy surface as he braced himself, hammering at a reinforcing brace he had prepositioned, angling it to absorb the force of the gust. The wood groaned but did not break. The metal latch bent under the strain but refused to yield. From the yard, Jerry and Martha both gasped, stepping closer despite the wind. It's holding," Jerry yelled, astonishment breaking through fear. "But barely holding." Tom's jaw tightened. "It's not just holding, it's redirecting," he shouted back. "The wind isn't fighting through, it's forced to go around, you see that." The neighbors squinted at the angle of snow swirling around the roof. Indeed, the gusts that had previously blasted directly through attic vents now arced outward, forced upward and over, spilling along the slope like water over a dam. The principle Tom had hoped for, the diversion of energy instead of confrontation, was working under the most brutal test yet. But the storm wasn't finished. A second, even stronger gust hit the south side of the roof, ripping at shingles and pressing the hatch down with crushing force. Tom leapt, bracing himself, hammering, adjusting, his movements precise but desperate. He felt the vibration in the wood, the flexing of the frame, the subtle give of metal. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to surrender to the cold and let the storm have its victory. But he didn't. Inside the house, the warmth was holding, but only just. Heat radiated through the rooms, fighting against the pressure of nature's assault. The children huddled in blankets, eyes wide, sensing the tension but protected from the worst. Their laughter had faded into anxious whispers, but their trust in Tom was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the danger outside. Outside, Martha reached for a plank of wood, intending to help reinforce the eaves. Tom grabbed her hand, dragging her back against the porch. "Stay inside," he barked. "Every second counts." Her eyes flashed with concern and understanding, her trust in him absolute. Minutes passed like hours. Each gust hammered, each shudder of the roof echoed through the bones of the house. Tom moved with relentless precision, adjusting, hammering, bracing, reinforcing. Sweat mixed with frost, dripping from his hair onto frozen shoulders. His fingers were numb, yet he could feel the pulse of the structure beneath him, reading every groan, every bend, every vibration. The neighbors could only watch, silent now, mesmerized and terrified. Jerry held a thermos in shaking hands, watching Tom's every motion. Martha whispered prayers under her breath, children clinging to her skirts, cheeks pink and frozen. They were witnesses to something beyond skepticism, a human mind and body working against elemental fury, improvising with courage and cunning. Then, for the first time, the storm seemed to recognize its limits. The roof door flexed, groaned, but absorbed the pressure. The wind's howl became jagged but less precise, energy spilling off the edges, failing to find the path through. Heat inside the house remained, persistent and steady, a tangible victory against what had seemed insurmountable. Tom finally stepped back, chest heaving, sweat freezing on his coat. He allowed himself a quick glance at the neighbors. Their faces mirrored a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief. The mocking smiles of the past had vanished. Now there was respect. Cautious, almost reverent, but respect nonetheless. Did you see that?" Jerry whispered, voice hoarse. It worked. The heat, it stayed inside." Martha's youngest child pointed upward, eyes wide. "The roof, it's keeping us warm," she cried. Her voice carried over the wind, pure excitement cutting through fear. Tom nodded, exhaustion and triumph warring across his face. "It's not magic," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "It's understanding, observation, working with the storm, not against it." Hours later, the storm began to relent, reluctant but inevitable. The wind died back into a persistent howl, shoving snow but no longer threatening the integrity of the house. Tom stepped down from the roof, legs trembling, lungs burning from cold and exertion, but eyes shining. He had survived the fiercest test yet, and the door in the roof had proved itself in the crucible of fire and ice. Neighbors came closer, brushing the snow from coats, shaking hands, offering nods of thanks. Jerry clapped Tom on the shoulder, his voice shaking. I don't know how to thank you. You saved us from freezing tonight." Tom smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "We did it together," he said. "This house, this method, it belongs to all of us now. Every eye watching, every hand helping, every mind thinking. This was a collective effort." Martha knelt to hug her children, murmuring thanks under her breath. "We were so scared, but Tom, he knew what to do." Her eyes met his, gratitude so deep it seemed to shine through the icy air. By nightfall, the storm had diminished into a whisper, snow drifting lazily, clouds breaking slightly to reveal patches of stars. Inside the Hale house, warmth radiated steadily, filling every corner, every shadowed nook, every room that had once been dominated by drafts and fear. Tom finally allowed himself to sit, hands shaking slightly as he sipped hot coffee. Outside, the wind still whispered, but it no longer demanded obedience. The house had held. The door in the roof had stood firm. And in that steadfast triumph, Tom Hale found not only warmth, but a profound sense of mastery, resilience, and quiet victory. The neighbors lingered, some sharing small jokes to release tension, others simply staring at the house as if trying to memorize every detail of its success. What had begun as ridicule had transformed into respect. Mockery had given way to awe, and for Tom there was a new understanding. Sometimes the most unconventional ideas, the ones others doubt the most, are the ones that survive the harshest tests and leave the deepest impact. The morning after the storm, the world felt different. The snow lay in soft, undisturbed layers, sparkling faintly in the pale light of the low winter sun. The air was crisp, almost clean, as though the storm had washed the landscape and left a fragile calm in its wake. Tom Hale stepped onto the porch, boots sinking slightly into the crusted snow, and inhaled deeply. The cold stung, but it was the kind of sharp clarity that made you feel alive, alert, and quietly triumphant. He looked up at the roof door he had built, its edges still dusted with frost, hinges glinting faintly in the light. For the first time, he could see it without the immediate threat of wind battering against it. The door stood proud, flush with the roof, unwavering against the storm's previous fury. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. What had seemed strange, even absurd, to his neighbors had proven itself. From across the snow-covered yard, the neighbors began to emerge. Jerry Wilcox, cheeks pink from cold, gave a sheepish wave. "Morning, Tom," he called. We owe you more than cough." "Fee this time." Tom shook his head. "No, you don't. You just need to look at what worked and maybe think about how to do it yourselves if the next storm comes." He took a step down from the porch, boots crunching against the icy crust. This was a team effort, whether you realize it or not. Martha Keene appeared, her children clinging to her coat. She smiled warmly, a mixture of relief and admiration in her eyes. "Team effort, yes," she said softly. "But you were the one who thought of it first. You made something no one else could imagine." Tom shrugged, a faint flush coloring his face beneath the frostbite. "Imagination isn't enough," he said. "You have to act on it, you have to test it, you have to make sure it actually works when the worst hits." The neighbors lingered, their eyes moving from the roof door to the house itself, noting the subtle signs of endurance. The slight sway of shingles that flexed but never broke, the even warmth that had radiated through the rooms, the absence of frost on window sills where it had always gathered before. There was respect now, quiet but deep, replacing the laughter and ridicule that had met Tom's idea weeks ago. Children ran across the yard, laughing, their cheeks flushed with both cold and excitement. They traced the line of the roof with their eyes pointing at the hatch. "It's like magic," one boy shouted. "The wind can't get in." Tom laughed softly, shaking his head. "Not magic," he said, voice carrying over the crisp air. "Just understanding how the wind moves and giving it a place to go instead of letting it tear through your house." Jerry leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I mean, we've had winters worse than this, and no one's ever come up with something like that." His tone was reverent now, tinged with awe. "You might have changed the way we all do things around here." Tom's gaze swept across the neighborhood. Some had already begun to make small modifications of their own, inspired by the roof door. Others were simply watching, thinking, letting the lesson sink in. A subtle energy ran through the community, curiosity, admiration, and an unspoken desire to be prepared to learn to survive. By late morning, the sun had started to break through the clouds, illuminating the frost-coated landscape. The wind whispered now, playful and subdued, carrying only a hint of the storm's former power. Tom climbed carefully onto the roof once more, checking the door, inspecting the latch, feeling the solid resistance beneath his hands. It was perfect, not just a structure, but a testament to patience, courage, and ingenuity. He thought of the nights spent hammering, the hours spent calculating angles, the exhaustion that had pressed into every muscle, and a quiet pride filled him. This was more than keeping heat inside a house. This was survival, mastery over nature, and proof that sometimes the unconventional path was the right one. Martha and Jerry called to him from the yard. "Tom, come down," Martha said. "We're making hot cocoa for everyone." He descended carefully, boots crunching against the hardened snow, hands red from cold. The neighbors gathered around, bringing thermoses, blankets, and small smiles of triumph. There was laughter now, not mockery, as people shared warmth, both literal and metaphorical. "Here as to the roof door," Jerry said, raising a steaming cup in a shaky salute. "To keeping the heat in and keeping our heads above freezing." Tom clinked his cup against Jerry's. "And to the storm we didn't let win," he said, voice steady, eyes scanning the neighborhood that had transformed overnight. The children cheered, some running to touch the door, to marvel at the ingenious mechanism that had held through the storm. Hours passed in this newfound peace. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the pristine snow, painting long shadows from the houses and trees. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and burning fire, the scent of warmth and survival. Tom walked from house to house, checking on neighbors, offering tips, answering questions. Each interaction was a reminder that ingenuity, courage, and a willingness to take risks could ripple through a community in ways no one anticipated. By afternoon, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. Curious neighbors from miles away began to arrive, eyes wide as they examined the roof door, the structure of the houses, and the ingenuity that had made warmth possible against the harshest winds. Some took notes, others snapped photos, all of them trying to understand how one man's stubborn idea had transformed an entire community's approach to surviving winter. As evening approached, the last visitors departed, leaving the Hale property quiet but radiant with a sense of accomplishment. Tom stood on his porch again, watching the sun dip behind distant hills, casting long, warm shadows over the snow. The wind had calmed completely, a gentle whisper now, almost respectful in its acknowledgement of the battle that had been fought and won. He pressed his hand against the roof door, feeling the solid, unyielding wood beneath his palm. The warmth from inside the house seeped through ever so slightly, a reminder of the victory achieved. Tom's heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just about heat. It was about perseverance, creativity, and defying expectations. It was about proving that sometimes the ideas others laugh at are the ones that make the difference between suffering and survival. Martha approached with her children once more, carrying blankets and cocoa. "Thank you, Tom," she said quietly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've changed everything for us. You've changed the way we think about winter, about storms, about what's possible." Tom nodded, letting a small smile touch his lips. "We all did it," he said. "The roof door is mine, but the courage, the preparation, the work, that was all of us. Every hand that helped, every eye that watched, every question asked, it matters." As night fell, stars began to glimmer faintly above the horizon. The neighborhood was quiet now, cozy behind the walls that had been fortified, heat safely contained, spirits lifted by survival. Tom Hale leaned against the porch railing, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the soft warmth behind every wall, every door, every carefully calculated plank. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. He knew more challenges would come. More storms would test them, but tonight, for the first time, he allowed himself to feel an absolute, unshakable peace. The roof door had held. The house was warm. The neighbors were safe. Laughter and relief replaced mockery and fear. Tom Hale smiled, a quiet hero in the cold Nebraska night, knowing that sometimes it took stubbornness, ingenuity, and sheer determination to hold the cold at bay, not just for the body, but for the heart. And somewhere deep in the stillness, as the wind whispered softly against the roof and trees, Tom understood the truth of it. When you dare to think differently, when you act with patience and courage, even the harshest elements can be bent to your will. The storm had come, but it had not won. Not this time, not here. And the warmth, both of fire and of community, would endure.